Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, fantastic. Well, yes, as Rune said, I was just minding my own business in my office one day. My area of research is staring off into space. And then there was a knock at the door, and I was introduced to the world of esports, which I was thrilled about. It's great fun and very interesting, and I'm so excited to be here. And thank you for inviting me and having me here to speak with you today. Looking over all of the presentations that we've had so far, I begin to feel slightly self-conscious about this one. And if there is an opposite of a keynote, then this is about to be it. So I want everybody to enjoy your snacks and lower your expectations because I wanted to talk about cameras of all things. And when I started making this, I gave it a very lofty title of aesthetics. But as you will see, I came to be more and more resentful of the idea of the camera itself. But I know it's an object, an apparatus, and an idea that is sort of throughout esports, in spectatorship, and there are virtual ones and real ones. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that today. I'd like to apologize right off the top for my accent. I am from Texas. I use y'all in work emails. I grew up along the same road my whole life, just 952-kilometer stretch of I-35, which runs along the Chisholm Trail there. And so I am very, very Texan, born and raised, and I've been all over the world, but I still live there in Austin, Texas. I perhaps have internalized a lot of the mythology of cowboys and things like that, and this slide is deliberately put together with European takes on the cowboy itself, if you recognize any of those. I'm sure you do, especially created for this audience. I think because of that, I love crime, and I love to steal. Most of all, that's one of my favorite things to do. And so this is my version of references. And these are books that I have read, I guess, on game design along the way, which I felt very helpful. And I wanted to recommend them to you. And if I've stolen something from your research and it shows up in this slideshow, then you should count yourself among the lofty sort of few people who are here. So if there is an original thought in here, likely that I lifted it from these texts as well. I'm not a man of letters. I do not have an advanced degree, a PhD, or a master's, or anything like that. In fact, it took me 6.5 years to get a degree in drawing, which is the easiest degree you can get. You draw and you get a hug and 100, and that's it. Still, it took me a while, so I guess I'm not sure what that says about me, except that I'm very excited to be here amongst all of you. I'm a mister among a sea of doctors. My background is professional. As soon as I got out of school, and even during school, I started working in animation, first as a background artist, and then as an effects animator, and then as a character animator, and then got more into the creative side with storyboarding and things like that, and had a wonderful worked on several series, worked on a feature film as well, Scanner Darkly, if you've ever seen that, the rare sort of adult animation, which was great fun. I also worked in video games for about 12 years. I've shipped 16 games. I started in GameCube and PS2 rather, an original Xbox, and then eventually kind of worked my way up, oddly, to GBA and Game Boy DS games. I've never worked on an esports title or a multiplayer title, but I have many friends who have. And being from Austin, there are several companies that work in this space, so we have regular conversations with them, and that's just some of the work. And of course, all of the video games I've worked in, and I was an artist, environment artist, a lead artist, there were a lot of conversations about cameras as well. And in animation, less so. We typically sort of just talk about things compositionally. The camera is this abstraction, unless there's a deliberately sort of a moving shot, and then we do have to consider that. I actually got into visual effects near the end of my professional career, and there I am looking very cool on set with a miniature, or you can see a puppet bird in the background, and that's where I sort of encountered the phenomena, truly, of the camera, the apparatus of the camera itself, and was initially sort of skeptical of it. It's problematic, it's heavy, it's expensive, it requires a lot of equipment behind it, and so that's a little bit what sort of motivated this talk today. Due to what I believe is a clerical error, I ended up working in the Department of Radio, Television, Film, and I've been there for 15 years, and I've taught every fall, spring, and summer. This is my 48th semester in a row. I'm about to teach. I also taught for 6.5 years in the game development program at our local community college, which is a technical program I think Seth was talking about the distinction between those. And currently, I also hold an appointment at a college just a few miles down the road at Texas State University in their Department of Theater and Dance. They have a nascent film program, and I'm sort of the one digital guy in that. So a lot of fun. The Department of Radio, Television, Film at UT is in the College of Communication. And so we have several departments sort of adjacent to us: journalism, communication sciences and disorders, communication studies, advertising, marketing, and PR. I am part of, I guess, generally sort of the gaming ecosystem at UT, although currently I'm the animation area head for RTF and sort of, I don't know, I do both at the same time, video games, but also classical animation, which I know is pretty broad. And this is certainly not the only things going on with gaming. I didn't even know Sirka till I got to this conference. She also teaches at UT and is involved in a lot of those conversations in the School of Business as well. So it's bubbling up all over. But there isn't really like a dedicated, I suppose, esports concentration, which I felt was ridiculous. You know, obviously it's tremendously popular, and here we are sort of talking about that. And so I became very interested when Rune came by, and then was fortunate enough to meet Tobias and be part of the conversation at least. And I look forward to sort of extending that. See, I told you I like to steal. He made that one. So that's my best looking slide. Which one? Oh, someone else did. Okay. Well, you know, obviously, like it's this huge multidisciplinary subject, esports, and I thought, well, this is very interesting. How does it transpose at the University of Texas? Is it possible administratively to put together any sort of coherent program or course or things like that? And it became, I guess, sort of this hobby of mine on the side. I'm an amateur at this, and I haven't gone pro yet. I also have children. And they play sports. I was not sporty as a kid. My son plays baseball, and my daughter plays roller derby. I don't know if you're familiar. It's a very violent sport that goes very fast. They also love video games, and I've observed, of course, that they exist in these sort of virtualized spaces. They're social in Roblox. We play games together. We play in trios in Fortnite. And we're ranked gold, and they're not old enough to win money yet, but we're coming for it, okay? So a 7-minute walk, I've been writing everything down. I'm gonna go back, and we're all gonna do that, all the things that y'all are mentioning. And so, you know, I very interested in how they sort of are using technology, and of course going through COVID and seeing how that caused a lot of us to have to shift to teaching in those spaces. I was fortunate enough to come from a background in game development, so I have had great fun doing so, but I feel that there are a lot of limitations to that. And honestly, I feel like esports, multiplayer, and these sort of shared virtual spaces are underutilized in education, and I think it's a very promising area to get into, and I feel like esports is, for me, is the key to sort of building, being able to articulate that better as an educator. I do want to talk about the camera today, and there's a lot to talk about in terms of a camera, and of course in the film school we discuss all the wonderful things about aperture and f-stops and diffraction, and that's a Bayer mask at the lower right, and you know, sort of sensor sizes, and I'm not going to go into that too much, although I think it's probably a relevant conversation to a lot of esports. And of course we have a legacy of broadcasts in the RTF department. And so it's interesting to sort of put those things together, and Twitch streaming, and these things are unfortunately kind of working independently at UT. And what I'm trying to do is bring in those people who have traditionally dealt with sports and spectatorship and broadcast and events with the newer initiative in esports, which sort of bubbles up from the students. And we have some wonderful facilities, but they're not quite in an academic unit and things like that. But I guess the other word that I used in the title was aesthetics, and not having any sort of background in actual education. I had to look this word up, and I found it sort of problematic, largely because of the words beauty and artistic taste, which I always feel is very gatekeeping to me. I typically look for authenticity in my students, and some of the classes I teach are quite large. I teach a 250 student class each semester, and so, you know, trying to you know, be a judge of that is I think sort of counterproductive. The film department at UT is marvelous, and we have all sorts of incredible equipment, very expensive lenses, which are $20,000 per lens, and sort of frightening for me to work with. And of course, we have these incredible sound stages and studios, and a huge green screen, which we bought from Robert Rodriguez after he created the Predators movie, if you've seen that. One of the largest, I think, in Texas. I was part of the UT 3D program, which was an initiative to sort of build out a program around stereoscopy. So you can see us working in those spaces as well. And that was one of those programs that sort of matured and then kind of went away as interest in sort of developing that idea waned a little bit. As an offshoot of that, we got into sort of 360 video space, and at the lower right is a camera that we invented, co-invented with the cinematographer for the Transformers movies, who's a UT alum. And so was in that space for a long time, and that led to virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, which has now been taken up with various units around UT. And, I find the space interesting, but I worked in it for a few years, and I'm like, oh, what's next? And so esports is next. So I'm excited about that. We also have motion capture, several motion capture volumes, which I would categorize as a big sort of three-dimensional camera. And often they have smaller cameras as a component of it. We have one that has 14 cameras that run at near infrared at 120 hertz, and it's great fun to play with. And we have had collaborations with athletics, sort of optimizing those things in the Department of Anthropology. So in addition to entertainment, I'm very interested in sort of the scientific application of a lot of our filmmaking technology there. One of our newest initiatives is in virtual production, and we have a partnership with Epic, and the teacher used to be a producer for Epic, and so they're, of course, very interested in getting into a variety of different sort of verticals using their game engine. And virtual production is an area that we have expertise in, not only in sort of the legacy production and cameras, but also we have, some expertise in sort of digital production as well. We're able to apply to that. These are some older GIFs from that, but of course that requires a pretty significant outlay of money to put together a studio like that. And we've seen lots of colleges put together virtual production programs, but not have faculty to teach these areas. So I took your point, as this has come up several times, about, hey, everybody wants to do esports, but who's going to teach it? Do you just put an adjunct in it? That is a mistake that we have avoided with virtual production, but as we think about esports, is something that I definitely want to consider. I don't want to teach the esports class. I mean, I do, because that would be great fun, but I think that there are obviously much better people in here and to do that. And of course, artificial intelligence is an area that we cannot deny, and nor do I try to. And so I allow for that in all of my classes, provided that students are able to sort of articulate what's going on, and not simply like I went there and typed it in to build some depth using those tools as well. Anyway, I'm probably going to go way over. You need to hold the sign up at some point. I know everybody was looking to get out of here. I guess I should back up way back in time and then walk us up to the idea of camera a little bit. Of course, before there were any visual images at all, right? I suppose we just danced and sang around fires and said poetry to each other and all of the other sort of artistic types that are more ephemeral and long-lasting. Fire, the original new media, allowed us to sort of create soot and charcoal and deal with sort of I suppose an early sort of chemistry to create these cave paintings. And I often use some varieties of these to talk about animation, because there's a lot of beautiful motion in here. Animation is going to be a theme in this coming up. Fire also, of course, allows for pottery. And again, here's animation again. And so you see sort of a sequential series of images. It's not on that pot on the right, that's from Greece. But I'm a big fan of animation, the technology of animation, the technology of duplication, things like that. Staffordshire, he left. Who's here from Staffordshire? Anybody else? It's Staffordshire, 1780. There's a big development when Thomas Wedgwood, scion of the Wedgwood family, salted bitumen of Judea on a piece of leather and rubbed it with lavender oil and came up with the photogram or heliogram I don't know if you've ever seen these. They're reliably to be found in museum gift shops. You put a piece of film on the ground and then a leaf and put it in the sun, and it creates a sort of a photograph without any sort of lens. Thereby ushering in the age of photography, which will lead to cinema in just a little bit. Around the same time, Paris, 1822. I don't know if you remember the very first slide in this, but it was a sort of a bucolic scene of the Texas countryside that was also from 1822. There was nothing there. And so here's Paris around that time. And a couple of things were very popular there that sort of, I think, are related to the technology of image making. And one was dioramas, which I think has some parallels to virtual reality in that you're sort of put into these spaces with life size sort of characters sort of drawn there. And here's some diagrams of some pretty sophisticated dioramas from that time. And then some also theater tech was moving along in interesting ways, and they were using projection and sort of animated via levers and machinery to create illusions, which I think is kind of related to some of the stuff we're talking about. One of the people who ran those theaters was also a painter. This is a painting of his, and I'm sure you've heard of him because his name is Louis Daguerre. I don't know if you knew he was a painter, but he is actually a pretty good one. And then, of course, he was sort of responsible for evolving the science of photography quite a bit. And there is that very first photograph, and you might compare that to his painting, which that upended. Now, before we get to cinema, I guess we should say that animation technology was still evolving at this time. The thaumatrope had existed since ancient Greece. But here we have the zoetrope, which uses these slits to create the persistence of vision, and then the praxinoscope, which uses a mirror. The limitations of these, of course, is that they're cyclical and looping animation, very short. And there are modern incarnations of this. The Pixar Museum has one that's synchronized to strobe lights that's very impressive. There's some in various subways around the world. The flip book, oddly, was invented well after photography. You would think it would be sort of obvious if you had a stack of paper, but I guess it was sort of rare. And there are some medieval manuscripts that have a little stick figure sort of animated that I suppose some scribe put in there. But when paper mills became popular, then you start to see that, which is the animation that exists sort of, it has a beginning and an end, I suppose. There are lots of other sort of smaller steps, like the kinetoscope, but ultimately leading to the cinematograph. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is the motion picture camera. Now, there's a wonderful book called The Anime Machine by Thomas Lamar. I don't know if anybody's ever read it, but, you know, he makes some pretty interesting points, which I really take to heart, coming from animation originally, and then going through video games where the camera was sort of a simulation of a real camera, and then ultimately discovering what a real camera is. But I do like the idea that animation sort of predates cinema, and cinema is actually sort of a part of animation itself, but has, of course, been subsumed in theories of that. So I don't think anybody would claim that. The title of this particular lecture was called Camera Mimetica, which is a mixture of a Latin word, camera meaning room, and mimetica, which was actually drawn from Roger Caillois, Man, Play, and Games, mimesis, as one of the points of games. But animetic is a word that I learned not too long ago, and I like to invoke it quite a bit. I think we often talk about cinematic moments, and, you know, when we're making a game, developing a game, or when you're playing a game, I will sort of deliberately create these things, but cinematic is bound to the apparatus of the camera itself, and animetic is in contrast to that, where there is a sense that very manual, like the layers are separate. It's not an actual sort of three-dimensional scene that's being captured. And you might think of something like Smash, right? So with those sort of side-scroller games, and I saw some fighting games and things like that, where it of course is not attempting to be realistic, it's not attempting to be truly three-dimensional, but very sort of constrained. So it's not animatic, which is a storyboard set in a timeline, but animetic, which I think is a nice antidote to the word cinematic. And frankly, you know, as games sort of develop, I sort of encourage my own students to maybe break out of sort of some of the defaults there. Coming back to animation and maybe the idea of spectatorship and getting into theater and audience theory and stuff like that, you may have heard of Winsor McCay, very famously sort of created some of the early animation technology here. And if you watch this Gard A film, which you see on the right, which was drawn on rice paper, and he drew the backgrounds every time, by the way. If you watch the entire film, it's presented in this, he's at a dinner party, and oh, let me show you this dinosaur on a big pad, and then the dinosaur sort of comes to life. And this was sort of comes from the tradition of the lightning sketch. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but a lot of early animation is based upon sort of something that was going on in vaudeville at the time, where you would have somebody drawing something and telling a funny story, and then they turn the drawing over upside down and it reveals something new. So there's some fun things to do with theater in there as well. Walt Disney, of course, is another key figure in the history of animation, driving a lot of sound stuff as well. So you see Steamboat Willie, first sound sync. And by the way, he didn't draw these. Iwerks drew these, sort of largely unrecognized contributor to early animation. He also did Fantasia, which was in 1940, the first stereo film. There were several sort of advances in audio and visual synchronization. There's another person from this time in film theory. You may have heard of him, Sergei Eisenstein, a very famous film theorist and pioneer of sort of montage, and this sort of the steps sequence here was copied in Ghostbusters, a variety of different movies. Very sort of serious looking guy. However, loved Disney, loved him so much, traveled there to Los Angeles, to California, and to hang out with him. You can see him there in the middle. Now, about this time, Walt Disney was working on this first feature film, Snow White. This is 1937, pre-Fantasia, but only by 3 years. And one of the techniques that he employed was to film the actors and then to trace over the top of them using a technique known as rotoscope. Okay, so we do rotoscope both in visual effects and in animation, and it's a wonderful technique if you're just getting started because it'll make your animation look absolutely fantastic. However, it is slightly problematic in that, of course, you're relying upon a camera to give you something. Okay, you're building off what the camera is doing. And there I included a few other examples. You can see the Bakshi Lord of the Rings in the upper right, which really just looks like it was Xeroxed and composited in a fancy way. And then The Last Express, which is a wonderful game created by Jordan Mechner of Prince of Persia, and he also employed that technique in Prince of Persia, but The Last Express has some great sort of rotoscoping in it as well. The social realism of mid-century Soviet Union is in there. They employed that technique quite a bit as well. Eisenstein did not care for Snow White. What he loved, I'll back up. Oops, back. Oh wait, it has it in here. What Eisenstein really appreciated about animation was another word I just learned, which is plasmatic. Okay, that's a fun one to bust out. And that's that quality of characters that are morphing and they'll just pull off their face and just become something else. They're not grounded in that sort of realism. They're not sort of based upon that. And you can see Mickey Mouse there. And the lower right one is actually from Studio Ghibli. This is the cartoon that's playing in Kiki's Delivery Service when they deliver the fake cat to the house. And I think it's sort of a call out. Eisenstein called it plasmatic. It's called rubber hosing in the industry, same idea. And I just want to say that, I work in CG a lot. This is a very hard, difficult thing to achieve in CGI. So, and we'll come back to that later. And you start to see it more and more now in CGI. But I know many riggers and people who are sort of putting the character setup together for CGI, and it does not come naturally. So it was a technique that was sort of abandoned in the 30s, although, sort of kept up through Looney Tunes and things like that. But we're just really kind of rediscovering how to do it with the technology of CGI. I just wanted to include these because they're great fun and part of the golden age of animation and not necessarily using rotoscope. So as theatrically released animation sort of fell off around the 1970, and these are shorts that might precede a film as well, not just sort of feature films. You start having limited animation, and limited animation was made for television, and so the budget constraints are a little bit different. They're trying to recycle things. They have much lower budgets. And I think because of that, they sort of stepped away from the idea of realism, such as it exists in something like Snow White. And so you have a resurgence of maybe thinking about animation just in terms of the composition and the canvas and the stage, and the idea of camera becomes a little less relevant. So you see Yellow Submarine and the dot and the line and Gerald McBoing Boing there on the lower left. So I really do sort of appreciate that sort of type of animation. I guess at some point we need to get into the digital age, because as I understand, almost all esports are digital. Maybe not, I think so. And of course, there's a period of ink and paint, which accompanies sort of digital developments, which is sort of fascinating. But CGI is typically, or 3D modeling, 3D animation is typically what we mean when we talk about sort of CGI. And this is, it's all simulated. If you've ever worked in one of these game engines or a 3D modeling suite like Maya, the light is simulated, the surfaces are simulated, and they're not real. They're, I wouldn't say a caricature, but they are a simplification of a lot of these ideas, right? Light is both a wave and a particle, but we just draw it as rays in CGI, which I think sort of does sort of disservice to it, perhaps, but that's just the only way we're going to make it work. The cloth and dynamics and fluids and a variety of motions and squash and stretch are all interpolated, and there is the intervention, very significant intervention of the computer in everything that you're producing, right? In fact, you can fight it. You can make frame-by-frame animation in CGI, but it doesn't want you to, so it's an uphill battle. And of course, characters are based upon sort of realistic skeletons, and the armatures that we use are all based in sort of realism, although a simulation of that. And most of all, of course, is the camera. If you open up any sort of game design tool like Unreal or Unity, right, you can create a camera, and that camera is going to have a lot of parameters that it doesn't need to have, because it's not a physical thing. There's no lens that gets dirty, right? It doesn't weigh anything at all. It's just a point in XYZ space that's oriented towards something and sort of capturing it. And yet great lengths are taken to reproduce the qualities of the apparatus of the camera itself, which of course is very attractive when you first get into a game. Oh my gosh, look at all the things it can do, depth of field and this and that. But I have to wonder if, first of all, it doesn't need to have that. And I have to wonder, like, the default seems to suggest that you should make things cinematic, as it were, right? That we shouldn't make things animatic. It's almost difficult to turn these things off. So you're always sort of dealing with these things, but they're imposed artificially upon the simulated camera itself. So there are no blades and f-stop or anything like that, and yet these are parameters you're going to have to deal with. Now, of course, in curvilinear perspective as well. So the CGI operates in a very sort of linear Cartesian space, and we have to sort of deliberately fake the optics of it, right? So I don't know why I put this slide in here, except perhaps to accompany and complement my earlier comment that here we're having the apparatus of the camera sort of imposed upon CGI, and we're having to deal with that all the time. And I feel that that's taking us farther and farther away from, as practitioners and creators in these spaces, from maybe some of the ideas of what is animation. And if a computer is simulating animation, is that animation, right? If an AI, is creating something, is that the same as a human creating it? And I guess one of the final points I wanted to make about a camera is something that I lifted from On Video Games by Soraya Murray, if you've ever read that. And it's a great book. And chapter 3 goes into a case study of Metal Gear Solid: The Phantom Pain, okay, which creates a sort of a fake Afghanistan, right, and embeds it with a significant amount of cultural meaning. But one of the things discussed in that chapter at great length, and I highly recommend it, is the virtual camera itself. Hideo Kojima is a huge fan of American cinema, huge fan of American cinema. I mean, he puts the kerchief is from De Niro in this movie, right? And the virtual camera in this one, right, has a film stock to it. The lenses get dirty. right? It has filters, it has shutters, it has all of these qualities, and he deliberately sort of places it to evoke certain genres or even moments in films, right? The lens gets dirty, that's very common in video games, right? And in all of these cases, Kojima is embedding a lot of meaning in the camera itself. And, that's, when you think about esports cameras, when I look at how they work, right, I think what they're trying to balance is, of course, performance, right, because that's sort of key in these situations. However, I've noticed that there is a camera bob in some of these things, and that seems to indicate that somebody is walking behind me, running behind me with the camera, and that is sort of artificially imposed. And if you look at a lot of the way that cameras work by default, they're sort of automatically taking on those sort of cinematic qualities, as I said, the apparatus of the camera itself. And I think that the idea of cinematic is so prioritized within discussions of the camera that it maybe gets away from what it could be potentially. I guess I want to finish up on esports. I don't have a conclusion with this, but when I look at esports, I think that there's a new opportunity for us to sort of revisit what the camera does. When I play Fortnite, and I love Fortnite, but I don't win much. I die. And there's this terrible moment when you die in Fortnite, and I'm sure it happens in a lot of games, where suddenly you are thrust into the camera of the person who just killed you. And you're so angry. But then you watch, and you see how they move their camera, and you're like, why do you swing it around like that? Why are you looking at these things? Why don't you look behind you? Aren't you nervous about that? And I feel that there's this embodiment that happens at that moment while I'm waiting for the next round to load. This is more than just Hideo Kojima embedding meaning in the camera for the purposes of reproducing American cinema. What I'm seeing here is a very strong sort of empathic connection to that particular player. And moments later, of course, after my initial sort of furious sort of response to dying, of course, I begin to, of course, you want that person to be good, right? You're like, well, if they are number one, then I must be pretty good. You don't want them to die right away, right? And I watch them, and there's this moment where I'm really learning, I think, how to play the game much more than any guidebook or YouTube video, because I have embedded myself in my own camera and to suddenly be thrust into the position of a spectator camera controlled by that particular character, I think perhaps offers a way forward for learning itself, so. And so I guess that's how I'm going to end. I don't have any sort of answers here, except, when I look at esports, I say this is different from how video games work, right? There's this community, and there are physical, real cameras accompanying virtual cameras. And I've worked in spaces before where, I was the in-game compositor, in-world compositor for a large virtual world, and we use real cameras and would stream them in, and virtual cameras and stream them out. And I just, I look at my own children and how comfortable they are in these environments like Roblox. And, I think that honestly, the future of education, is, for me, I would like to build towards this idea of sort of shared virtual spaces, where, I'm not just sort of lecturing, but the person is inhabiting me. They can look through my hands, right? Let me show you how to model. You're in the camera, and then I will model and texture or whatever it is. And so that's it. Big question mark at the end of it. But I suppose, and I'll probably reach out to every single one of you after this and study the literature, and I haven't found very much on it, but I think I'm looking for some new words, animetic and plasmatic, and I think we need to start inventing some new concepts behind the idea of cameras, and not simply like a spectator camera that mimics the cinematic camera, but this idea of sort of the interactivity and the multiplicity of the camera. If there are 1,000 cameras in my world, right, and I can control, or someone else sort of controls the spectatorship, I think that could be a very powerful tool for education moving forward. So, okay, that's it. Thank you.